Welcome back, Vault Hunters. Dirch here, and I've got a video today about the DNA of Borderlands, and what that means to me at least is what makes Borderlands unique and special, and what gives it its staying power. Everything that kind of makes it up and makes it feel like Borderlands. Since Borderlands came out and kind of jump-started the looter-shooter genre, I guess, there's been a lot of other games that have tried to copy it, some with success, some with failure. There's a ton of first-person shooters, but a lot of them just blend into the noise of all the other ones. And there's very few that stand out. And I wanted to make a video talking about this because with Borderlands 3 coming up, you always kind of hear people saying, oh, I want this and I want that. And a lot of what they want makes Borderlands more like other games and less like Borderlands. So I think this is an interesting topic, to me at least, is what about Borderlands that's different, added up together, makes it a great game. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And also, I didn't have a video for the last 2 days-ish. I don't know when this one's going to get up. But I do have a busy life and a busy schedule, so while I'm back, I can't commit to daily, but I'm going to try my best. So that out of the way, let's talk about the DNA of Borderlands. First one I want to talk about is the genre blending. Because Borderlands did this actually on multiple levels. And that's where some people kind of miss. Now, yes, it was a looter shooter. But it was more than that. Because it's a role-playing looter shooter. I grew up playing a lot of shooter games. I'm in my 30s. So, I grew up with the original Wolfenstein, the original Doom, obviously GoldenEye was a big one, and so forth and so forth, and, Halo obviously upped the game. But, so that makes it really hard that it's such an established genre of games, and how do you stand out? And a lot of games try different things and fail pretty miserably. I think it was like Sunset Overdrive Microsoft did recently, and there's so many that just fall on their face. And Borderlands was able to stand out. Now, they did that by blending genres into this to make it a unique shooter game, which the world hadn't seen for a long time. There was just a ton of like Call of Duties and Battlefields and Battlefronts and so many games that started feeling repetitive. Repetitive guns and all that stuff. So by adding the looter shooter, taking the Diablo, which was a big one, big influence on this, obviously, adding all that loot to it, and having more diversity of guns, which I'm going to get into later as a topic of diversity, it made the game really stand out in that way. But you also brought in the RPG elements, and not a lot of shooters would you level up in the game and gain power and everything like that. And this has been, I think really successful, but I do know some people that complain that, you get up to God mode and all that stuff, where games like Fallout that have a flatter leveling up system, where you're mainly like leveling up your gear, not so much your character as much. You do character level up in Fallout, but you don't get as strong as you do in Borderlands compared to where you start. I get that kind of stuff, but Borderlands is all about that typical RPG, 1 to 50, 1 to 80, 1 to 100, whatever the level cap is, where you just, you keep gaining, getting bigger and have higher level guns. And that has that RPG element to it. You're playing through a character's eyes, you're playing through the story as a character. Borderlands isn't the best of RPGs, and it's probably not the best of shooters, and it might be the best of looters, though. But when you combine all of those things pretty well into one cohesive thing, it's actually quite an amazing experience, and they've been able to do that now for 3 games, and that's really impressive, and that's the blend that they haven't moved from. They've shifted a lot of things from like Borderlands 1 to Borderlands 2, less things from Borderlands 2 to the pre-sequel, but those core elements are there. Even if you look at the original 4 characters, Mordecai, Brick, Lilith, and Roland. And when you look at those, Lilith, if you go to like old school, like class-based RPGs, almost like Dungeons and Dragons style, or like old school Final Fantasies, a lot of stuff like that, Lilith is like your black mage. You know, she does those elemental, the fire spells, the ice spells. I don't know, there wasn't ice in that game, but you know, the elemental, the lightning, the all that stuff. Like, she is like the black mage. Brick was like your knight, your tanky, beefy character. Mordecai was kind of like your ranger, who Rangers are like more versatile than the knights. They could hit from range or close up. They were faster, so they had good DPS, but they didn't have that single big hit, and they were a lot squishier. And then Roland is probably like your paladins, which is kind of like a white knight, a little bit of spells, less DPS, but still, you know, a solid attacker. And they really molded the first 4 characters after like typical RPG classes, and that I found interesting as well as a guy that grew up with RPGs. So from a genre blending of gameplay, they did an excellent job. Now in Borderlands 2 in the pre-sequel, they moved away from those class-based things, which I think is good because then you're kind of pigeonholed, and they built off of personalities, and I'm going to talk about personality later too. But then genre blending on top of just gameplay, they genre blended actual genres. So the first Borderlands was a mix of kind of sci-fi, fantasy, post-apocalyptic, a little bit of Western. And they mixed these genres into a feel, which is cool too, because not only was I a video game nerd growing up, but I was like a genre nerd. You know, I love Western movies, I love sci-fi movies. You know, I love, obviously, grew up watching like Mad Max and cool post-apocalyptic stuff. So I love all of these things. And then they took a step further by going genre in the DLCs. You know, obviously the zombie genre. I think a lot of us out there love zombies. And they did a really good job making a zombie DLC. But also like the Claptrap Robot Revolution was definitely genre-based. I don't think Nox was as strong in the genre base, but it was a great DLC, obviously. And then, you know, Moxie's Underdome was, you know, the Thunderdome from Mad Max. So they definitely pull genre into this, and they, you know, they continued that. Borderlands 2 DLCs were very genre specific as well. You know, obviously you got the pirate one. You've got the Hammerlock. Big DLC. I mean, obviously Tiny Tina's DLC, you know, all Dungeons and Dragons, again, going extreme genre there. What? Oh yeah, and then Mr. Torg, like doing their whole wrestling tournament thing, and yeah. So they definitely blend genre, or sometimes just go specific to genre, which is really fun and interesting too. So they not only do the genre blending gameplay, but they do it story and atmosphere wise, which a lot of games aren't able to really pull that off. Now Borderlands 2 kind of moved away from the sci-fi fantasy, and I say sci-fi fantasy because for some of you out there, like, sci-fi is actually science fiction, not just like aliens in space. So like to some people, Star Wars is not sci-fi, it's just a fantasy movie in space. And that's why I'm kind of saying sci-fi fantasy, because it's more along those lines than, you know, something like Dune, which is actual science fiction. So I get that, and that's you know, a line some people argue about. The next one I wanted to talk about is atmosphere. Atmosphere is one of the trickier ones. It's, you know, how does the game feel? And there's actually a big shift from Borderlands 1 to Borderlands 2, but in some things they were similar. So Borderlands has this post-apocalyptic, kind of desperate atmosphere, I guess, is the best way I can describe it. You know, things are bleak, things are tough, things are rough, but it's also very comical at the same time. Now, the story in Borderlands 1 was a little more straightforward and serious, and then the side quests were a little more silly, and then Borderlands 2, they really took that to the next level. And they got sillier while keeping the story fairly serious. There was still like claptrap and scooter humor and stuff like that. You know, Borderlands 1, similar scooter, claptrap, Crazy Earl. But then you had like the T.A. Baja, who everyone loves, who's a little fun, but then, you know, spoiler, he gets hung. and it gets pretty dark. So Borderlands really mixes the dark with the comedy and the desperate with the light, and that's kind of tricky. And some people would argue in Borderlands 2 they failed at doing that. I think they nailed it. I love the balance of Borderlands 2, but it definitely had a little different atmosphere from the first one, yet staying kind of similar. So we'll see where Borderlands 3 ends out. I hope they kind of keep to this formula, but with different writers. And Borderlands 3 will be interesting because, Mikey Newman really kind of, as far as I know, helmed a lot of that first one and made a lot of the characters and wrote a lot of the story. And then Anthony Birch was on for 2, and Newman was still on for the second one. But now Mikey Newman is gone due to health reasons, although his YouTube channel, Movies with Mikey, holy shit, that stuff is good. If you guys have not checked that out and you guys love Borderlands, watch that, because you get pure Mikey, and Mikey is great. And if you don't love Mikey, I don't know what to say, because Mikey Newman is fucking fantastic. So yeah, if you guys have not checked that out, you should, because it's so fucking good. He is amazing. I'm jealous of what he does. But yeah, I also got to meet him when I was in Texas, and that was fucking cool. Because yeah, he's an amazing person. And that, moving back on the topic and less about how much I love Mikey Newman. But anyways, no Anthony Birch, no Mikey Newman. But I think, as I said, like the DNA of Borderlands, like Gearbox has a DNA, and a lot of this Borderlands DNA even spilt into Battleborn. So I'm not too worried about that, but it will be slightly different. So we'll see how that lands out. But I hope they are able to kind of keep onto this, because the other thing that might be slightly different is we're leaving Pandora. We might still be on Pandora. We don't know. Just because there's Prometheus doesn't mean the whole game's going to be in Prometheus. You might have parts on Pandora, parts on Prometheus. We don't know what's happening. We're pretty sure we're going to Prometheus, but that could just be like a level of the game. It doesn't mean the whole game's going to be there. It could be half the game. It could be 3/4 of the game. It could be 10% of the game. There could be more planets. We don't know. But we are moving. And even going to the moon in the pre-sequel kind of changed that up a little bit. So yeah, I'm really interested to see how the atmosphere in Borderlands 3 feels compared to the first ones. And this one might be the one where they have the most leniency to move and still feel Borderlands. Because a lot of the story kind of goes with atmosphere, and Borderlands games are really character-based. In my mind, there's always more than the two, but there's kind of like two types of storytelling. And you have your kind of plot-driven story where character is a little bit less important. And then you have your character-based ones where it's really, you have a weak story, but you have really interesting characters. So your story and plot is less important. And Borderlands kind of falls more to it's a spectrum of them. Some of it right in the middle, awesome, like Breaking Bad, who had amazing characters and character development, amazing plot. But it's a spectrum of where you are on that, I guess, rather than two kinds. And Borderlands falls way more towards the character spectrum. Borderlands 1 had a very weak story. The story was almost non-existent. But the characters were so charismatic and so great. And that's part of the reason why Mikey Newman is great, is, he had such a part in making those characters. Like instantly, TK Baha I brought up. TK Baha is like a marvel in character writing. Because you go see this guy, he's probably got like 20 lines of dialogue. Like, there's not a lot of TK Baha. But yet, everybody seemed to insanely love TK Baha to the point where they keep bringing him back even though he's dead. Yeah, he's actually been in all 3 games even though they tried to kill him off. And I don't think anyone saw like the love for TK Baha. And that's just a character you barely meet, but he's so charismatic and so wonderful that, they brought him back for the zombie DLC, they brought him back for the Halloween Headhunter, and then they brought him back on the Claptrap DLC for the pre-sequel. But then, instantly you meet Marcus and Claptrap and Scooter and Tannis and all these characters that just drag you in. And the playable characters of Borderlands 1 really didn't talk and didn't really interact with the story. So although you got their character stuff through some echo stuff and just kind of playing with them with their one-liners, and like their personalities kind of come through their action skills and stuff. But yeah, it's so story driven. You just fall for these characters. And then Borderlands 2, they really kick that up a notch, because Handsome Jack, I think, goes down as one of the all-time great video game villains now. And we've kind of had him in 3 games, so it's a little unfair. A lot of villains you don't get that much, some you do. But holy crap, and especially that voice acting by, I believe it's Damian Clark, like, he nailed that. And that really drives it. And then you get Hammerlock, who I think is pretty beloved, and you get to know the Vault Hunters better because now you see them rather than playing as them. Although that was hit and miss. A lot of people didn't like Mordecai's direction. But in general, the characters of this game are so great and so intriguing, and really drive that atmosphere as well. So that's part of the atmosphere, is do better on the plot, as they did get better, but drive it through great, charismatic, interesting characters. And Tales from the Borderland is a huge testament to that, because Tales of the Borderlands, I was hesitant on it. I wasn't interested in Telltale games. I tried to play the Walking Dead one, and I think I played like the first release of that. I didn't buy any of the expansions or whatever. And I was like, this is interesting, but I'd rather just watch it. It's a pretty good story, but the gameplay didn't get me. I'd rather just watch a Let's Play of it. With the Borderlands one, I'm like, I'll give this a shot. Oh my god, it was amazing. I was blown away by it. I was just sucked in. And it was cool seeing Pandora from that different world, but again, you had some familiar characters with, Jack, obviously, and you ran into some others, but they brought in all these new characters, and again, they fucking nailed those. So that's a big part of the Borderlands story, is get better with the plot, as they have. Borderlands 1 had almost no plot. Borderlands 2 definitely had a better one. The pre-sequel had a really good one, but it was still driven through Jack, and then, Tales, obviously. So, character-driven atmosphere, but also that dark, kind of desolate, desperate atmosphere combined with a lighter side. Here and there through some comedy relief, but a lot of the lightness through the side quest. Next one I want to talk about is diversity. Oh boy. Borderlands really nails the diversity in many parts, and you guys might hear the word diversity and just thinking, oh no, gay characters. But that's not what I'm just talking about here, but I will talk about that. Diversity in weapons, diversity in characters, diversity in now environments. But mainly diversity in guns is really what makes Borderlands. And I'm going to talk about the gun system a little bit later as far as the system, but in so many shooters, you alright, you get a sidearm, like a pistol, maybe there's a revolver, and more of a semi-automatic pistol, and then you'll get an assault rifle, maybe 2, but they feel kind of similar. You'll get 1 shotgun, maybe a shotgun and an automatic shotgun, and the guns kind of feel more real. And there's not a lot of weapon diversity. But in Borderlands, part of the RNG system, which I'll get into in the gun part, just brings up so much diversity, and then the diversity in the red text. But before I get to the red text ones, let's just talk about the Borderlands 2 and TPS regular shotguns, because this is, I think, where they fucking kill it. And shotguns is probably the best example of all of this. But by having the brands have almost a different personality, and being so different, combining those with gun classes really brings it out. But then you combine it with the barrels and the parts, and it really blows up. So a Jacobs shotgun to a Torg shotgun, yeah, they're all about raw power, but they work so differently. And it's a completely different experience going Jacobs to Torg. And then you bring in something like Hyperion with the reverse recoil on a shotgun. It doesn't feel anything like the other two. TDR's maybe a little bit less different than Bandit, But then you get the chucking on the reload. They're all so different. Bandit ones, a lot of them you can just shoot for days because the magazine size, where Jacobs you're reloading every shot or two. Some of those 4, but you got some of those Bandit ones, especially the low barrels, where you can shoot almost 20 times. So, within the shotguns, just every brand is so severely different. But then you go barrels. So, like a Jacobs quad to a Jacobs Long Rider is a 100% different experience, even within the same brand of shotguns. And then the coach gun is kind of in between those two, as it should be. So you have a ton of diversity of playstyles just within shotguns that are not even red text. And then like assault rifles do this really well too, even though assault rifles weren't as popular, obviously, with a lot of people in Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel. But going from the kind of regular barrels, which, all were a little bit different, but not too different. But then you'd get the Vladov spin barrel, which definitely changed up the guns. And then you also got the Torg barrels, which changed them from bullets to grenades or rockets. And although that wasn't hugely successful, it was great diversity in weapon style and gameplay style. And then, of course, across brands, they would still differ quite a bit. Dahl with the burst obviously makes it a lot different. Jacobs with the non-automatic fire, the semi-automatic. Even that, like a Dahl minigun to a Jacobs minigun to a Vladov minigun are very different experiences. And then, the Torg minigun, which had a lot slower spin-off, but had the kind of explosions. This is all great weapon diversity. And like Borderlands 1, in some ways they even did this better on some things. Well, like, all shotguns felt a lot more similar in Borderlands 1, and like all SMGs and so forth. But then you had like the Masher, which was in regular guns, which totally changed your pistols. And then you had a lot of that Tedior ammo regen stuff. So there's, in some ways, Borderlands 1 did this better than Borderlands 2. Having legendary parts on the accessories and stuff. But Borderlands 2, I think, separated the brands better and then separated guns within guns a little bit better, minus some of those exceptions like the Mashers and stuff. So, all that brings in a bunch of diversity, but then you go to the red text guns, and here's where they kill it. I have not played another first-person shooter, really, with crazy guns like Borderlands. The Pimpernel in Borderlands 2, the Orion, the Min Lighter in the pre-sequel. Like, that gun's crazy once you figure it out. The Twister, the Becca, some of my favorites. But even like the Madhouse, the Fibbers, so many guns, the Storm, even, not hugely successful ones, are still really different and interesting and fun to find ways to use it. There's so many different guns out there, the Conference Call. It's all over, where most other shooters, the Destiny's a great example of. Destiny's a big competitor to Borderlands, obviously, and probably the other most successful looter shooter, although Destiny 2 really fell flat. But I didn't play the first Destiny because I only play on PC, and it didn't come to PC, and then Destiny 2 I didn't play because it didn't look that interesting. But I watched a lot of my friends play Destiny on Twitch and so forth, and although a lot of Destiny looked cool, and the ability to level up your guns, some of that stuff was different, none of the guns seemed that different. They kind of suffered from, well, it was more like sci-fi fantasy stuff rather than your Call of Duty, Battlefield, which are kind of using more realistic, like real-life guns. Like, it was more fantasy guns, but all the guns kind of felt the same. Yes, pistols were different from assault rifles, but they had like those classes, and within those classes, I didn't see a lot of diversity of how those guns work and how they change playstyle. So that was kind of sad. And I haven't played another game that has the weapon diversity of Borderlands. So that's it. And then bringing that diversity to the other part, the fact that Borderlands has such a diversity of characters. In a lot of games, like Skyrim is a hugely successful PvE game. And it's one of the few PvE games to have the staying power of Borderlands. But Skyrim and diversity of characters, and I'm not even talking about diversity of sexuality or race here, but in Skyrim, like, everybody feels the same, everywhere looks the same. I don't see the diversity in there. We're like Borderlands, like, just having such big characters, you know, again, Scooter. You know, huge, awesome character that doesn't feel like any other character in the game. And yeah, you have some boring NPCs that all feel the same, but then mixed within those NPC areas, you just get these outrageous, wild, big characters that really stand out. Now, the last part of that is, yes, the diversity of sexualities and races and different people. Not a lot of games do this, and some people get really offended by this. To those people, I say, stop being a snowflake. If someone's gay, it doesn't affect your life, so get over it. Basically. I know people call me a snowflake for defending LGBT, but it's nice to have inclusivity for those people to have something to look to and have someone to relate to. You know, as a straight white male, 99% of Hollywood TV and video games relate to me. But, you know, the Black Panther, as we just saw, was such a huge success because it gave all these young, you know, African American men and women strong characters to relate to, and that was a big deal to them because they don't get that, especially in the superhero world, and that was a big deal. And it's a lot of the same way with the LGBT community in Borderlands, to like have those characters that they can relate to and have those characters they can identify with. And I think that's a huge thing for Gearbox to keep doing, because it is somewhat risky. You do risk alienating people, but the game's good enough where people don't quit over it, even though a lot of people are that childish where they would quit over those things. And I really applaud Gearbox for bringing that diversity of type of people into their game, so everyone can have someone in the game they can relate to and identify with. That's really important. Next off, let's start talking about personality, because a lot of the diversity kind of felt with personality. So I'm going to roll into that. So, you know, as I was talking about the diversity there, so much of that was talking about personality. And part of the personality of Borderlands is just big. You know, it's the badassery, all that stuff. But then again, just going back to like the characters, like Scooter is a big personality. Moxie is a big personality. You know, Marcus, all the characters are big personalities, standout personalities. You know, Torg, you don't get a bigger personality than Torg. And that's part of what stands out, is just the bigness of the personality of Borderlands. But even that, like, Jacobs as a gun manufacturer has a personality. Torg as a manufacturer and as a spokesperson as Mr. Torg definitely has a personality. You know, Vladoff. All these guns are more than just gun brands. The gun brands have a personality onto themselves with their identity, and some of them, like I said, even have representatives of that. That's a huge thing, the personality of the characters, but even the personality of the environments, the personality of the enemies. It all is kind of this big badassery, as they love to say. And a lot of games fail so big in this. You know, I talked about Destiny and Skyrim before, and like Destiny, their commercials were all like, especially the Destiny 1 commercials, were trying to like show off this personality in their commercials, but then you go play the game and it's void of personality. There is none. You know, in Skyrim, again, great game, but totally void of personality. It was just like this huge open world you could explore, and a lot of customization and a lot of modding and a lot to do, but completely void of personality. Where Borderlands does a lot less with the customization and all that stuff, but nails it with a personality. And why this is so important, one of the big things I keep seeing, and I have been seeing for years on people's like wish list for Borderlands 3, is character customization, where you can make your own Vault Hunter. And I think this would absolutely destroy Borderlands. You know, like Sal. Sal's a big-ass personality, but Sal is Sal. You can't custom make Sal. You can't change Sal. And, you know, same thing with Aurelia in Borderlands 2. She's such a big personality, such a unique personality, and you can't make that. You can't just slap things together and have her. And once you introduce custom characterization, that destroys it. Now, they could do better with characterization, you know, just the reskins, which are almost always the same texture. Heads have some different textures. I wish they would do better and improve that part of it, but not custom. And people even suggest, oh, what about, you know, gender bender, where I can play as a woman Sal? But, like, Sal is Sal. And a lot of times, even by changing genders, you kind of wipe that out. And it's harder to make all that happen. And part of the reason why is when they make characters for the Borderlands game, they actually start with their personality and build their skills into those personalities. They did an Inside the Gearbox actually talking about this. Anthony Birch with Aurelia. I believe it was Anthony Birch. Might have been someone else. But they were talking about making Aurelia. I think he was already gone by that point. But anyways, moving on. And with Aurelia, they knew she was Hammerlock's sister. They knew they had a tenuous relationship. They knew she was really rich. So here's this rich woman who's very cold to her brother. She's very standoffish. You know, she's massively rich. So she's got this house full of servants and all this stuff. She doesn't get her hands dirty. Okay, how does that translate into playstyles? Well, one, she's not the type of person to get her hands dirty, so she's a sniper. Because she's going to do her stuff from the range. She's not getting it up close and personal if she can avoid it. Two, she was so cold to her brother. Hey, cryo character. Boom, easy. And then three, because she's so rich, she's got the servants. They did the servant tree, which was a little hit and miss with people. I thought it was brilliant. And I love the fact that in Borderlands, the pre-sequel, they really doubled down on the co-op stuff, and they did better with the co-op stuff. In Borderlands 1 and 2, they barely touched on it. You know, you had some stuff like Rez and Roland's turret, but not a lot of co-op synergies, where the pre-sequel, they definitely went heavier into that, and I think that's a success. And I don't think it alienated solo players like some people claim, because I played a ton of Aurelia solo, and she was just fine. She was amazing. But, you know, that's part of the personality is, like, Aurelia, who I think is one of the funnest characters they've ever made in Borderlands, came so much from that personality. But, like, Jack, too, with, like, the sacrificing his doppelgangers for his own strength. That's a very Jack thing. Even though it was his doppelganger, you know, they brought that into it. You know, then that Hyperion stuff, and like bringing the personalities to make the characters is such an interesting way to do it. Now, obviously, it's not 100% of that. Like, all right, well, Maya's the next Siren, so she's got to have phase something. What is her personality to get into that stuff? So sometimes they have some preconceived notions, but on a lot of them, you know, you start off with, you know, who are they as a character? What are they like? How does that influence their skill trees? And you don't get that in Destiny. Destiny, you just start, you have a blank slate that you kind of build out. And that's cool for those games, but for Borderlands, so much of what makes it memorable is Mordecai, Lilith, Roland, Brick. You know, Brick's a big one. You know, Maya, Axe. Like, everyone, Gage. People love Gage. Krieg. Holy shit, Krieg. I can't even believe I didn't bring him up until then. Like, you can't get Krieg in Skyrim or Destiny. You just can't. You can't get him in Torchlight or Diablo or any of these general make-your-own-character games. You cannot make a Krieg. And I think Krieg's one of their biggest successes of just unique, interesting characters with an insanely big personality that people love and latch on to. You just can't get that by doing custom characters, and that kills it. So, like, the personality of Borderlands is one of those huge things. You know, no other games have I seen people have such a relation to weapon manufacturers. Because of the personality of them, because of the different traits of them, because of how they work. all these things. I mean, even the villains. In Borderlands 1, the first boss you fight is Nine Toes. And holy shit, like, boom, you get that, you know, splash screen of 9 toes, but 3 balls. Like, it's so great. And it just instantly, like, brings you into this world. And few games are able to pull that off. And that's so much of what makes Borderlands great, is this massive personality of all parts of the game. You know, the villains, the heroes, the NPCs, the environments, the guns. All of it is screaming out with this individual personality that all these other games miss. And it's so hard to do that by taking this game and making it something else, making it more like Skyrim, making it more like Destiny. You can't do that. It just ruins it. So next, because I was talking so much about the personality and diversity of guns, let's talk about guns. There are a few things in Borderlands that define it as much as their guns, and I've already talked about them a little bit with the diversity and the personality, but the random loot system of the guns is something that, again, very few games have been able to pull off, and pull off as well. You know, I've played some of the Diablo and Torchlight and different kind of games like that, and although they have a ton of loot and it drops everywhere, it's still, like, it doesn't feel as different as the guns in Borderlands 2 feel different compared to those. You know, it's like, alright, here's an axe with better stats, but it's still an axe with better stats. And Borderlands 2, partially through that diversity of them, and then combined with the RPG elements, I think is the most successful looter game in history, in my opinion. And obviously, a lot of people will say certain ones are better or worse, but to me, Borderlands nails it, because you get a lot of loot, but it's so different, and it's so unique, and it's so fun, and everyone latches onto their own thing. Now, this one is probably one of the more controversial as far as Borderlands 1 to Borderlands 2 in the pre-sequel, because Borderlands 1 had a very different system than Borderlands 2, and I prefer the Borderlands 2 system, but I miss part of Borderlands 1. Now, Borderlands 1 had, the better parts of Borderlands 1 system, I'll say, is the fact that the unique attributes were not always tied to the barrel. You know, you could get a hybrid legendary gun. So they had legendary barrels, they had legendary grips, they had legendary accessories, legendary scopes. Not sure about stocks, but like, there was, I think, legendary materials, which Borderlands 2 doesn't really have material in the same way. So Borderlands 1 worked very differently in that way, where the legendary system was a little different, because you could get like an Ajax Ogre, for example, where in Borderlands 2 a legendary is just a legendary. You can't get like a combination of legendaries. So like, I think the only Borderlands 2 item that the legendary things were put on the scope instead of the barrels, the Fremington's Edge, if I'm not mistaken, or one of the only ones with like a unique scope. So let's just say, for an example, if Borderlands 2 worked more like Borderlands 1, you could get like a Fremington's Edge Pimpernel, and you know, things like that would have been really fucking cool. But you know, it didn't work like that way. You couldn't combine them. So for some people, they make the argument that Borderlands 1 actually had more guns than Borderlands 2 because of that. There's a lot of numbers into that, and I don't really care. They both had a ton of guns, and it was fun. So, you know, that was one thing that they did better. Dots in Borderlands 1 were way more effective, which was better, but I hated the tech pool system. It was so confusing. You know, you had times 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it, to this day, at one point I had a grasp on it, but it's been a while since I looked at it, so I'm not even entirely sure. But like, your tech pool would empty out, and the bigger your tech pool, the more chance a dot would proc. But dots were almost more like splash damage with dots and all this stuff. And although I like the effectiveness of it, I think the tech pool thing was just confusing and hard to understand. And a very small percentage of the player base understood the tech pools. They just understood 4 is better than 1. in Borderlands 2, instead of tech pools, you had splash damage and dots. And dots were really simple. It's dot damage and dot chance. I like that. I think that's a better way of communicating it to the customers. They just needed to tweak the numbers. They were more effective. Splash damage in Borderlands 2, there wasn't much splash damage in Borderlands 1. And Borderlands 2, I think splash damage was awesome, but it wasn't that well communicated to the player. You kind of had to play with the guns and test them to figure out what had splash damage, what didn't. Because some things looked like they had splash damage, but they didn't have splash damage. So you really had to kind of test the guns, figure out, and then there's different kinds of splash damage, which I think they should get rid of altogether and just have one type of splash, because there's like grenade splash and rocket splash and gun splash and weird splash, and like to this day, I don't think the player base has a 100% understanding of splash damage. There are still questions out there, which is amazing because there's so much that's been figured out and discovered about this game. So, you know, as far as like elements, I hope they keep the dot and the splash thing, but I hope they add splash to the weapon card and just say, you know, splash damage, type of splash damage, and percent of splash damage. Because the splash, you know, it's like 50%, 10%, 40%, 80, 100, whatever. And then splash damage also has a radius, which I don't know if you need to put that on the card. You can kind of see it. Or maybe you can have some drop down on the card where you can see advanced stats. I don't know. It'd be nice if we could see more of this stuff without data mining. But I like that. I like the splash and the dot system better than the tech pool system. But I like the effectiveness of the tech pool system better. And I like the diversity of Borderlands 2 guns better than Borderlands 1. Because in Borderlands 1, I didn't latch onto brands as much as I did in Borderlands 2. Because in Borderlands 1, like, brands were more of just stats. Like, you didn't have Hyperion's reverse recoil, Tedior's chucking, Jacob's semi-automatic. Like, Jacob's in Borderlands 1 were, like, slow and powerful. You didn't have that as much of a, I guess, style of a gun. Where Borderlands 2, there was such a style, and they were so unique, and they felt so differently. I think that's better. But the Borderlands 2 kind of part system was a little bit better. I didn't really like the mat 1, 2, 3, and 4. I kind of like Borderlands, alright, body, barrel, grip. Like, you actually had parts that make up the gun. Like, the material thing I never really liked. But I do like the way in Borderlands 1, especially, you know, the mashers. I love mashers. Everyone did. Mashers were fucking cool. Partially because they were really good. But, you know, I'd like to see things like that, like a masher accessory back, to really diversify the accessories more. I would like to be able to get legendary anything, not just a legendary barrel or a unique barrel. And I mean, that way too, maybe you could even combine like a unique and a legendary to a point. And that really helps the diversity and personality of the guns by combining them. So I hope they're able to mesh the Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2 gun systems into one and take the best of both worlds. I think that would be a huge success. But I hope they change it up enough too, because part of the problem with the pre-sequel using the same guns as Borderlands 2, like, we didn't have to relearn them, they were just the same, and although I love them, I kind of want to feel something new and interesting. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, the guns, there's so much that make the guns so amazing in these Borderlands games, and again, I've not played another shooter that comes anywhere near it, either to Borderlands 1 or to Borderlands 2. Next up is skill trees. You know, this is obviously a huge one, and a few other games have done this in the shooter genre, but I don't think many games, even in the RPG genre, does this as well as Borderlands. I'm sure there's some that do, but these skill trees are brilliant. Now, the skill trees have gotten way better, but, you know, I was talking about in the personality, how the skill trees are like a personality of a character, and that's where they do so much better, I think, than most games with this, you know. Again, the Diablos and type of games like that, they're very generic skill trees that are good and God, what was that one? Was it PoE or whatever? There's that one that had like the biggest skill trees in the world. Path of Exile, I believe. They're insanely big skill trees, and you could go a lot of different paths, but it was all like very generic, small stuff. And I didn't find it nearly as fun as the Borderlands skill trees. So why are the Borderlands skill trees so big? Part of it is because it's primarily a PvE game, you can go big with them. And I'll talk about the PvE later, but, you know, they changed the way you play the game so much, starting with that action skill. That's such a huge thing. And Destiny kind of had that, but so much of that stuff just felt the same. That the action skill just changes the combat loops of the game so much. You know, although all the characters can hold the same weapons, you know, playing as Maya and playing as Zero are completely different. And it's even so good that playing Melee Krieg and playing Melee Zero are completely different. You know, Zero's this agile, fast, stealthy assassin that spends the time to set up the big hit and then will one-shot enemies. And it's doing a bunch of things to do that. And Krieg is just a berserker that will run straight at you and apply axe to face. And he's very tanky. He takes a lot of damage, and when he takes damage, he just gets stronger. You know, he can throw his axe where Zero can't throw his sword. Obviously, there's such different play styles, and actually, that's kind of oddly enough why when Krieg first came out, a lot of people struggle with him. They try to play him like Zero when he's not Zero, and then, you know, brilliant people like Spunky said, no, don't even use a Roid Shield. Wear a Rough Rider. You know, and that's the thing, is the skill trees of this game just change it so much. So again, like Zero is one of the best examples of this. Zero in Borderlands 2 is, you know, like to a lot of people it's like perfect person player melee, but then it's also this amazing sniping tree. So to have a character that's the best sniper and the best melee, arguably with Krieg, I get it, is such a victory and success of skill tree design, because that's two completely opposite playstyles, but you can make them excel at both. And that's, again, that is fucking fantastic. And it's perfect for an assassin, but it's just everything in that just changes the way you play so much. And, you know, Borderlands, the pre-sequel, arguably did this a lot, the best of the series, I should say, by adding in so many game changers, getting your skills earlier, making it easier to get down a tree with, I think it was tier 3 was the one pointer, or was that tier 4? I think it was, either way, I'm blanking off the top of my head, but they had about halfway down the skill tree, you had a 1-point skill, so you could get down the skill tree faster and get more diversity of skills. And the game changers in that one, there's so many more of them. And, you know, game changers are some of the best things to really change how you play. You know, Maya's Converge, Res, and now the patch Cloud Kill are 3 great examples of that. And there's so many great game changers that just, everyone's got such different combat loop. You know, playing Nisha to Aurelia to Jack to Wilhelm to Claptrap, obviously, are all so different. And again, I've played a lot of RPGs, and a lot of RPGs don't do character diversity of each playable character feeling so different as Borderlands 2 did. And to do that when they're all using the same base of all these weapons, and, you know, to make them even like specialized to weapons where certain people do things so much better, like Zero really sets up for the burst damage outside of DPS, where, you know, he's not that great with SMGs, but he's amazing with snipers or even shotguns where he doesn't have a skill tree for them, because so many of his skills gear towards that big hit burst damage. He is so good as like a shotgun ninja. Where other characters like Sal is just all about DPS, not so much the burst. So they even gear towards different kind of guns, and that's, again, it's so brilliant the way they do it. And I can't wait to see what they do in Borderlands 3. Because also, I know this isn't Borderlands, but in Battleborn they really killed this. And just making the way you played so different with so many different characters going through their action skills. And they, you know, obviously use different guns because you didn't pick up guns and stuff. So it's different. But just a game where they built, 25, 30 characters, I think is really going to help them with the diversity of building characters. And diversity of skill trees and diversity of the way the characters work. I really think they learned a lot of valuable lessons in Battleborn that they're going to apply to Borderlands 3, and I'm really excited to see that. So yeah, the skill trees, again, I've seen the Destiny skill trees, I've played a lot of RPGs, I've played a lot of shooters, and nobody does skill trees like Gearbox does skill trees, in my opinion. Also, before I get on to the next topic, I've been thinking a while about doing an evolution of the skill trees video, kind of comparing how the skill trees have moved on from Borderlands 1, 2, and the pre-sequel. Let me know if you guys are interested in that, because it might be something I'd do. It would be a harder video, and it would take a long time, and there's a lot to do with it, but I think I might do that. But if I do, it'd be one of those ones where I might not get a video out for a couple of days, so it's going to take a couple of days to make that. But that being said, the next part is being a PvP primary game. Now, in Borderlands, all the Borderlands games, you had been able to duel, but it's not a PvP game, and it's really a PvE game. This is something that is crucial to being Borderlands. A lot of people have been wanting it to be a little bit more like Destiny, or make, you know, the whole, oh, will the next one be an MMO, will the next one be this, will the next one be that. I really hope they just stick to the Borderlands formula of PvE, somewhat open world, because that's part of what makes all this great. So once you go PvE or PvP, you are so restricted to balance. And balance has been a tricky buzzword, I guess, in the Borderlands community. Because, you know, oh, this character isn't balanced to the other characters, or this isn't balanced to that. But in PvE, it's not the end of the world, and I think a lot of the player base needs to give that up. I guess it's going off a little bit of a tangent, but like, Borderlands 2, Maya's not very good at raiding. It's just true, she's not. But she's so good at the rest of the game, and she's so good at co-op, you know, not only because she can heal and res, but she can slag so much. So a character that's more support based should not be as good at raiding as the other characters. I mean, they shouldn't put out the same damage as a Sal. That's just the way it is. So that's great, but also to be able to build a support character who is so good at solo play is also amazing, because in a lot of games, you know, RPG-based games and all of that, a lot of times your support players are a lot harder to solo with as your DPS characters. And, you know, that's not necessarily true outside of raids, and that's really awesome character design in the PvE world. So that's why I don't get hung up on that balance of PvE characters. But like, even in Battleborn, they didn't quite do this as well, because like Galt, who was awesome at PvP, kind of sucked at PvE. Those things happen. So by going PvP, you can't have Money Shot. You can't have Hellborn Krieg, who's like nigh invincible and just runs through like a maniac. You can't. There's so many things you can't do because you just can't balance it. You can't have the Pimpernel in a PvP game. It's just too powerful compared to other guns. You've got to balance the other guns so much in PvP. And that's boring. And the other part, if you have PvP and PvE, and Battleborn definitely felt this, is, like, again, I'm going to go back to Galt. Galt was too powerful for PvP with his shotgun and his hook, so they had to nerf his shotgun. I think nerf the range and nerf the damage. But the problem is, he was already kind of bad in PvE because like his mines were rarely effective in PvE the way enemy spawns and enemies are. And then the hook, like hooking in a minion to shoot him was kind of pointless, and he had such slow movement, it was really easy for him to get shot up, and he really sucked at PvE. But then by nerfing him in PvP made him like almost useless in PvE. And then you're pissing off part of your player base to appease the other player base, but then even part of the PvP player base is always mad at nerfs because, you know, they loved, you know, wrecking faces Galt. So... But then the people getting their face wrecked were happy because, you know, Galt is now better balanced, but you end up just pissing off so many people. By eliminating that problem, you can just go bigger, better, and crazier. And yeah, like Borderlands, Gearbox had to make a few nerfs to like the Bee and the Rosie, and that pissed off a lot of people, but if it was PvP, there would have had to been so many more nerfs. You know, the Pimpernel, if it was a PvP game, would have been nerfed. The Herald would have been nerfed. Money Shot would have been nerfed. Boar would have been nerfed. Like, well, maybe Boar would have been fine in PvP the way it works. But, you know, so many things would have had to have been nerfed for it to be PvP. And it just doesn't work. And, like, so much of the skills in Borderlands are kill skills, which don't even really apply much in PvP. Which, again... kill skills are fun, and you get like these momentum-based classes where you keep chaining kills and getting your kill skills active because kill skills are more powerful. And there's so much of Borderlands that goes away once you make it PvP, and you can no longer do it. You have to restrict the diversity of guns. You have to restrict the power level of guns. You have to restrict the power level of skills. You know, Jack's absolute advantage would have been so broken in PvP. I mean, so many guns, so many things just would not work in a PvP environment. And these are the things that make Borderlands great. So, like, Borderlands is an MMO. Borderlands is more of like Destiny. No. Now, you could take a little bit of that stuff, making like a better hub town where you communicate with people better. Like, I think that's a good idea while keeping it PvE. So, you know, whatever the hub town is in the next one, you know, being able to be at that place and somehow interact with people. Now, it's kind of a little harder because are you just going to have, you know, 1,000 sales running around that town? You know, I don't know how that works. Some kind of email system, some kind of... I don't know. I'm not a game designer. I don't know the best way to do that, but making the game more social, I don't think is the end of the world. But turning it into an MMO, not so much. Because you can't do an MMO with characters. You have to do MMOs with blank characters, like I said, and that ruins the personality of the game. So you just can't do a Borderlands MMO. It just doesn't work. And also, let's be honest, very few MMOs ever work. So let's not want Gearbox to set up for failure there. Like, the MMOs just always seems to be the curse of death. Like World of Warcraft, great. All other MMOs are pretty much failures. I'm sure there's been a few, but like, let's be honest, it's all World of Warcraft. So yeah, that's PvE is a cornerstone of the DNA of Borderlands. They need to keep it a PvE game. Now, there's been a lot of talk it is going to be online only, which will piss some people off, but like the world is moving in that direction. That eliminates so many cheating and so many hacks and so many things that I can see the pluses and the negatives of that. You know, the Steam always going down on Tuesdays around 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock is annoying. So yeah, there's pluses and minuses to that, but you know, I'm not too hung up on that. But yeah, it's gotta be PvE. I wouldn't even mind if they got rid of dueling altogether, because dueling is pointless. The only way people only duel to dupe guns. So yeah, I'm fine with that going away altogether. So yeah, all those things get together. The genre blending, the atmosphere, the diversity, the personality, all the guns, the skill trees, being PvP. Like, these are the DNA of the badassery of Borderlands. and all the things together that make it. And these are the things that you've really got to, like, in my opinion, latch onto these things. And maybe there's some that I missed, and let me know if you guys like have like your own DNA strand of the badassery of Borderlands, the things that make it unique, the things that make it special, because these are the things that I recognize as like the core experience of Borderlands. Now, there's a lot of things in Borderlands 3 which I want them to expand on. It doesn't mean you need to be like restricted by these things, you know. Things to improve on quick off the top of my head. Vehicles in Borderlands suck. If I'm kind of at the point where it's like either get rid of them or do something interesting with them. You know, better social capabilities, better player communication, I think is key. You know, better weapon storage is, I think, key to all of us, and hopefully online only can actually help with that. Better character customization, you know, again, going to Sal, like, I think Sal has to be Sal, but maybe you could, like, within, like, 20% make him taller or shorter or skinnier or fatter, you know, change his facial features a little bit, actually have skins that are different textures, not just skins that are different colors. You know, there's a lot better character customization you can get. You know, skill trees I think can keep evolving, and I'm pretty sure they will. I hope with like diversity of characters. I talked a little bit of Battleborn. One of the things I really liked about the Battleborn characters is that they all had different like body size. Like Borderlands did a little bit, but like there's drastic difference in body size, hitbox size, speed, jumping, running, walking speeds. All that stuff was different per character. So like in my mind, Zero should be a lot faster than Krieg. You know, Krieg was the only one where like they gave him extra weight, so you didn't grenade jump as far and some of that stuff. You couldn't get on top of the pig. But they've done very little of that in Borderlands. So I hope they increase that, and I hope that's one of the lessons they take from Borderlands, because, you know, playing Atticus and playing Thorn, like the movement was so different, or Cleese, you know, that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of ways which even on these things they can get better on, and then they can introduce new things. But yeah, that's basically my list and my rundown. I think I've talked long enough on this video, so let me know what you guys think and what you guys want on all of this, and I will see you all later. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit the notifications, all that jazz. Check out my buddy Ben's podcast, Residual Culture, if you are still listening. And that's it. I will see you all later. Bye.